Good morning, all. Again, now you can hear me if it's correct, and it's not just Charlie Chaplin on a movie, but then, well, less good than Charlie Chaplin. My name is Martin Locke. I'm the executive director of the Capitals Coalition. I will be moderating this session on developing new KPIs to uncover the natural capital value for business. What I said before, but what you missed, is that in 2021, of course, more and more businesses realize that nature is something they have to take care of, they have to work on, because it's crucial for their performance now and on the long run. So more and more businesses are starting to use KPIs to understand their impacts and dependencies on natural capital, although it's still a challenging issue. What are the right KPIs that are most helpful to understand their impacts and dependencies on natural capital in the specific context of their business, the geography they are located, etc. So this is what we are going to discuss with a panel of people representing business as well as standard setters, accounting organizations, and of course the European Commission DG Environment itself. I will introduce each of those persons when they come to the stage to you. Before kicking that off, I just want to remind you that we are looking for an engaging dialogue where we hope you are sharing your reflections and questions to the speakers using Slido. You all have the context for that, and I hope you have it open so you can work with it. Let's start with the discussion around KPIs. And first of all, I would like to invite Thomas Verheijen, who was seconded by DG Environment to the European Investment Fund, but stepping in for his old friends at DG Environment right now at this EBNS 21. Thomas, please come to the floor and share the European context, your view on double materiality and all of the exciting projects the EU is currently working on. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon. Good morning still, sorry. We lost a bit of time, but not that much. Thank you for inviting me. And again, the suggestion was that I was helping you a bit out to sketch the context. So as I said, and I'll do it in a brief way to catch up some of the time we lost, can always come back with questions later on. But as I said before, in mute mode, the landscape around KPIs is incredibly vivid. There's a lot of things happening. EU partners are often leading the pack, but internationally things are picking up very fast as well. Focusing on the EU, and perhaps helpful to frame our discussion, I always like to pick up to 5 initiatives that in my view are relevant or good to bear in mind. First and foremost is the obviously taxonomy, which is the ultimate flagship initiative that emerged from the 2018 Sustainable Finance Action Plan. It was, and it still is, actually an attempt to come up with a common language to combat green washing. So it is de facto a classification system, and it applies to the most impactful activities around it. It's been centerpiece, and from there it's been influencing various other instruments. We work around 6 environmental categories. We go through 3 steps, etc., etc. That said, whilst the overall framework directive was or regulation was adopted in 2020, we're still in the process of seeing so-called delegated acts containing detailed thresholds, etc., etc., being adopted as we speak. So the framework is still very much in flux there as well. One that is often forgotten, the second point, but that I'd like to bring to the table, is the so-called Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which is mainly focusing on the actors in the financial market, so asset managers, etc. And it was actually adopted earlier than the then the taxonomy, and it also starts introducing mandatory disclosure of so-called negative impacts with a set of indicators for those asset managers. It also classifies funds or activities in 3 categories, so-called Article 6, 8, and 9, for those that are a bit more familiar. In a way, it's the gray, it's the light green, and it's the dark green. And the latter, again, has then a link to the taxonomy. The reason why I think it is important to factor that instrument in is because at some point, they will need information coming from the corporate and the asset level into the funds to be able to classify their funds. And that's where, again, corporates start having a interest. Thirdly, there's the so-called CSRD, or Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive, which is the successor, or I should say the proposed successor to the so-called Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which is currently still in force, and which basically has been more detailing the way in which companies should report total environmental risks according to the double materiality principle. So I always like to clarify the obligation to do that is already in force today. It was only not very well specified. And so the CSRD brings along a lot of more specifications there. Very briefly on double materiality, which sometimes can be a fairly daunting concept. I'd like to, there are various ways to explain it and various terms that come with it, but I like to link to what the Natural Capital Protocol, in my view, has introduced very helpfully to align the interests of the corporates and the policymakers, in particular on the environment side, which is that one should not only look at how is my company impacting or my activity impacting the environment, but also to what extent is my company dependent on the abundant availability of nature and the environment. And that becomes a much more different picture. The double materiality, the explanation is a bit more sophisticated than that, but just to capture the idea. Fourthly, and I think perhaps the least known, but in my view, the most innovative and useful, certainly when looking forward, is what we do on the so-called Transparent project, or the work that we do on standardizing natural capital accounting methods, which is, as you probably know, the European Commission, the Environment, is supporting a consortium of businesses and advisors and civil society combined with the Capitalist Coalition, also the World Business Council, and we have some members of the Value Balancing Alliance here. So that's basically a bottom-up initiative, business bottom-up, that is trying to come up with meaningful, not only indicators, but also an accounting system that comes with it to basically report total environmental impacts and the various components. For the sake of simplicity, I'd like to refer to air, water, land, biodiversity, obviously including climate. Final point, I always like to refer to the work that the ECB has been doing, European Central Bank has been doing, very helpful in my view, because they really focus on the risk side. And I always recommend people to read the ECB guidance on climate-related and environmental risks. One of the institutions that at least promotes the holistic approach, not going for climate first and the rest later. So very, very helpful in this way. Again, I may have a few more reflections, but I prefer to stop here in the interest of time, and back to you, Martin.
Thanks very much for this, Tom. And it's great to hear these five things. One quick question from my side. You're talking a lot about disclosure and about the need that companies make their impacts and dependencies known to financial organizations as well as to consumers and the public. Is it only about disclosure, or is there something else too?
I'm grateful for the question, because it means that I've already adapted to what is commonly the case when we hear debates. To the contrary, I'm one of those that feel that we too often skip over the need to equip the decision makers in the companies to understand their relationship with nature and environment. Hence, natural capital accounting, and I forgot to say that, is not only there to feed meaningful in data for disclosure purposes, but a lot also to support internal decision making. And true, I prefer always I did a little bit. I emphasize the need for an accounting system, because I often think that we talk too often about the KPI, and then each KPI seems to come with its own accounting system. And that is obviously not sustainable from a business perspective. We need an accounting system that, in my view, is fully integrated with risk management and cost accounting systems. That is, for me, the way forward. But
okay. Thank you very much. When I started my professional career, I worked for the Ministry of the Environment in the Netherlands, and we run a societal campaign at that moment with the slogan, "A better environment starts with yourself." So this reminds me also of this. It starts with internal management decisions and then going outside with disclosure.
And we tend to overlook that.
Not the other way around. So thanks, Tom. Please stay with us in the case of any questions and the later discussion following after the others spoken. Now I would like to introduce to you Andresa Sousa from Natura & Co. Andresa works for a company outside the EU, and I think it's very good to start with a perspective from outside the EU. Andresa, can you please share your experiences with impacts dependencies, measuring those, but also on how Natura is working to promote and advocate for more ambitious biodiversity policies? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Hi there. So I'm a sustainability manager in charge of the IPNL development at Natura. Natura is a multinational Brazilian cosmetics company and one of the leading indirect selling globally. And since 2018, we have increased our operations in creating Natura & Co., which in 2020 back here integrated Avon to the group that already comprised The Body Shop and Aesop. Currently, the group operates in more than 110 countries with 8 million representatives and consultants, being the world's largest B Corp, and we are part of the Business for Nature. One of the key elements for advancing sustainability in more responsible practices by companies is having metrics and policies that allow comparing results of these actions, as we already make with financial reporting and indicators. For sure, this will help us to answer how much value we generate to society. And when it comes here to double materiality, we have our IPNL, that is a new model where we integrate social, environmental, and financial impacts. This is designed to support our decision-making and reporting. The IPNL relies mostly on the capitals, the natural capital and social and human capital protocols, and it accounts for impacts on these three capitals and how it affects our employees, consultants, supply chain, as well as the broader society with tax payments and investments in supplier communities, and for sure all the natural capitals impact involving our supply chain. Our methodologies accounting monetary values for the change in well-being to the society caused by Natura's value chain. Changes are due to direct effects in health or due to economic outcomes valued according to its societal utility. So we use the health utility of income or the health utility of tax, because the local impacts, where people is part of definitely impacts the utility of the economic factors. The IPNL strategy is a way for us to define KPIs that adds a new layer in the impact measurement, going from metrics of output to outcome and then to impacts. So it is a support to our strategy and decision-making with consistency and a driver for prioritization. We have been applying, it is recently our definition of indicators, and we have applied 4 principles to define our KPIs from the IPNL measurement, which are enhance shared value. So coming here, bringing here the human rights is very central, and reducing negative impacts on the natural capital. The materiality of impacts measured with the IPNL modeling is other principle. The link with business strategy, so using drivers connected with business strategy is central, so we can bring everyone to this agenda, so our investors and financial stakeholders. Other important principle is the possibility to track it quarterly. So for management purpose, we can report that integrated with our internal reporting and measurement. I think I stop here.
So thank you very much, Andresa. This is a great example of one of the leading companies on integrating natural capital into the core of your decision making. So you mentioned that you're active in over 100 countries, and with your supply chains, you must be collaborating with a lot of companies. So what are your learnings on how to bring other companies also on board in these kind of implementations of KPIs?
Working with our supply chain, and that's central. We are sure that this movement is not Natura alone can't move things much, and so we need our supply chain engaged. We have strong programs to engage with our supply chain, the critical supply chains as well. And so the way we do that is working with partners and with society, the non-organized movements of society and local movements when it comes to our small supply chains. And this is definitely central for us to not to move forward alone. And we need also other companies. We are part of the Impact Evaluation Roundtable, where we share learning and try to engage everyone that is with us. Thank you, Martin.
Okay, that's very good. So in the supply chain, your message is to collaborate with companies, of course, with partners, but also with other organizations, local communities that are part of the context where your supplies are coming from. Thanks again, Andresa. And let's move to the next panelist. We move back to Europe, to another sector too, automotive sector, Florian Klinkhammer from BMW, but also seconded to the Value Balancing Alliance. Can you share the example and the experience from BMW, including your VBA hat and ideas in relation to the taxonomy, the financial perspective, double materiality, etc.?
Martin, more than happy to do so. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to today's event and panel discussion. Good morning to everyone. As Martin said, what I would like to do, not only provide BMW's perspective, but also to provide the perspective of the real economy. So what does the implementation of the taxonomy really mean for the real economy? What are the implementation challenges? And what's the corporate perspective, what it means in practice, but also provide you with some insights on what is really needed from the real economy here. So basically, VBA and all its member companies basically strongly support the overall objectives of the Green Deal and also the EU taxonomy in particular, or as Tom has said, the ultimate flagship of the European Commission, because the basic idea behind, so to help mobilizing finance towards environmentally sustainable activities and projects, is highly appreciated and certainly that where we should target and focus on. However, and that's what I want to reflect, many companies and the real economy in particular, they also face a huge challenge while implementing the taxonomy regulation. So what does this mean in concrete terms, or what does this mean exactly? I mean, companies, be it BMW, but also all the other real economy companies are required to assess their taxonomy compliance based on a business activity or even on a product level along global value chains, and in the case of large multinational companies, also for many legal entities. So this requires companies to also set up new reporting structures, IT systems to ensure a taxonomy compliant reporting and to make it auditable. I mean, normally organizations report on an entity or group level, but not on activity level as is required by the taxonomy. And this obviously also requires substantial investments in IT infrastructure, knowledge, resources, and it will simply take time. It's also a challenge, and that is really a crucial problem or issue here, because many of the concepts, many of the definitions and criteria that is in the regulation or legal text is still unclear and leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And that currently really leads to a very high level of uncertainty, not only among preparers of company reports, but also among financial market participants, among auditors. And this is clearly a risk, and it will be a risk in 2022, where we expect the first reports to be published, because I fear that the reports will not be comparable, even not within the same industry, as this different level of interpretation is really a problem here. And this reduces the value added of the taxonomy from my perspective, and it might put the overall credibility of the taxonomy at risk. And as a result of different interpretations, I'm also concerned that the resulting heterogeneous reporting under the taxonomy regulation can also put companies at a reputational risk. So here, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the taxonomy is not a very useful tool. I'm very in favor of the taxonomy, and the taxonomy can certainly help identifying environmentally friendly activities. What I believe is that, especially as there is a proliferation of different standards, norms, interpretations on sustainability, and also different shades of green exist in the financial market, this establishment of a common understanding to enhance credibility, reliability, and certainty is really helpful, not only for companies, but also for the international financial markets. But one point that I want to make here is that the taxonomy does not tell you anything about the entire company and its ESG performance. And also one caveat here is that the taxonomy also does not tell you anything about the parts or activities that are not aligned with the taxonomy. So hence, I believe it can really serve as one part or piece within the wider context of sustainability regulation, but it's not able to capture the entire corporate performance. And I believe to achieve a clear, effective, and credible transition, it requires a globally applicable and globally aligned approach or standard that is fit for purpose, and it must not result in kind of over-reporting. And lastly, and then I will also end here, from my perspective, to really drive the transformation, and transformation is key to change the global warming problem, to protect the environment. It's really crucial here to foster true sustainability, and that requires a more holistic view. One that covers all aspects of sustainability. So certainly the environmental side, but also the social and governance aspects. And it needs a much broader and inclusive view. So one that not just focuses on single activities, but that takes the entire value chain and value contribution of a company into account. And that's where the Value Balancing Alliance is focusing on, and that's what we are driving forward. Thanks. I stop here, Martin.
Thanks, Florian, for this the sharing of your experience. And you mentioned loads of things that we probably could have hours of discussions on. But let me pick on one of the first things you said, that the reports coming out of the taxonomy implementation, in your expectation, will not be comparable even within a sector. And so what would help to create this comparability? Is it needed that the EU is kind of providing the definitions and the standards, or can the sectors set them themselves? Is this the VBA, the Value Balancing Alliance, work together with Transparent? What is delivering these standardized KPIs, or is there something else needed?
I think what is needed in a very first instance is clear guidance and clarity from the European Commission, especially when it comes to the legal terms, to legal definitions, that there is certainty, that we receive definitions that are quite clear and that are legally binding. The real economy can play a crucial role here too, in providing examples that are pragmatic, that are usable. But these can just be recommendations or proposals on how to best implement it, on a best practice sharing expertise or best practice sharing examples. But ultimately, from my perspective, and what is really needed from the real economy or from the company side, is that legally binding, clear guidance from the Commission, ideally in the regulation itself, in the delegated act, and that would certainly help.
Thank you, Florian. And Thomas must be over the moon now with this request from business to provide clear guidance from the EU side. But we will go back to Tom later in the process. Let's bring in Jan Menko Groemen now from EY. There's also a need for pragmatic guidance from the real economy. And well, EY might not be the real economy, but you're working for the real economy and the businesses, and you're a pragmatic accountancy firm. Can you share your experiences on setting key performance indicators for companies that are relevant for their context and are helpful to better understand their impacts and dependencies on nature? Jan Menko, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. Have a warm welcome from my side as well, and thanks for this invitation to explain some views from my perspective on the really complex discussion as we heard before. We're talking about many complex different things, and I'm now then close to 30 years working in the audit industry, and for me, company reporting has the function to make performance of company transparent. That's a financial market, it's the players in the financial market and other stakeholders can evaluate this company for an investment, for collaboration, whatever it means. And we learned from the last years that financial indicators are not sufficient anymore to make this assessment from every stakeholder group. That means we need more information from companies to evaluate ESG performance as well. And this is a critical question, how we can we get it very timely, because the planet is getting warmer and the clock is ticking. And the most critical thing is that corporate reporting should be standardized. Otherwise, benchmarking, and that means investment decisions are not possible in a meaningful way. That means we need a global standardized reporting systems where we are working on. And I think in the discussion we have the ISSB, we have the EFRAG and the standard setting in the European Union. We should be careful with setting too many standards, which are really complex, and no one could implement these standards and can understand at the end what the company is reporting. And this is, from my perspective, one of the key elements. That means, beside disclosing the impact to planet and society, it's critical to disclose about the outside-in view as well. What does it mean for the performance of a company, especially in the future? Because we're talking about impact in the future. We're talking about ESG activities of a company. Within the VBA, we try to create standards to simplify the whole landscape of standard setters and ideas, concepts. And the most important thing we are doing with the participating companies to pilot all this, to have an idea if this concept we are developing is operational, is practicable for companies. Data availability is a big topic in this, because otherwise, if data are not available, we need much more time to have a reliable corporate reporting in terms of ESG activities and performance. The third aspect I want to mention is assurance. The CSRD asked for limited and at the end reasonable assurance for ESG reporting. I think the question for assurance is a complex and a tricky thing. Before we're talking about the right approach for auditing ESG reporting, we have to define in detail what is the content of ESG reporting, because this is critical for audit methodologies and approaches. If we are talking about qualitative or quantitative information, if you're talking about professional estimates or outlooks or whatever, this is completely different from an audit perspective and partly different from the result of an audit in terms of level of assurance. And we should be very clear to prevent any expectation gap on audit work for ESG reporting as well. We know there's discussions around financial reporting as well. And I think considering all this, we have a lot of challenges in the next months or years, I'm pretty sure. Beside creating the right format and structure for reporting and audit standards, we need sufficient resources with the need level of experience and skills to prepare all these reportings, to audit these reportings, and to understand these reportings. And I think this is really a critical element on our journey as well, to have sufficient resources available. And we should think about how we can manage this with universities and academia and other organizations as well. And I think we need a quick solution, and which need a simple and a practical solution to handle all these issues. And hopefully events like this are the basis for creating the best ideas to resolve all these topics we have on the table. Thanks.
Thanks, Jan Menko. And your call for standardization, you're not the first one at this panel discussion bringing that to the table, but it's quite a clear one. And at the same time, EY being one of the big four, brings the question to my mind whether or not the big four together could already develop in a kind of pre-competitive way such a standard. You're so driving the accountant's profession as big four together that couldn't this do the job?
This is really a good point. And in a specific way we are doing it together, because we are all joining different initiatives, organizations, professional organizations where we contribute and discuss all these topics. And in addition, I'm not sure if you know, all the big fours are supporting the VBA, for example. And this is the first time in my career that all big fours are joining the same project and collaborate very closely together, because we are completely clear that we have to handle this complex issue together, and we have to contribute with all our experience and knowledge to every project which improve ESG reporting and to solve this problem. And I'm pretty sure that this way of collaboration will be going further over the next months and years, because this is a critical element. But we should be careful with competition law.
Yes, of course. And I think even before VBA, the Big Four collaborated at least once, because all of the Big Four were part in the process to develop the natural capital protocol. And so pre-competitive collaboration can be a key also here that we can build upon. Probably something we will touch upon later in the process too. Let's move to Gerbrand Haverkamp, CEO of the World Benchmarking Alliance. And Gerbrand, what's your view on how we can accelerate the development of standardized KPIs to measure impacts and dependencies of companies in a way that is understandable but also comparable across sectors? Because that's something that you would need as World Benchmarking Alliance, I would guess. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. And you're absolutely right. We sort of sit at the end of the conveyor belt where all the data comes out, and then it's for us to compare that on a company level to see how one company is performing against the other company. So all of this conversation about standardization, alignment, and more rigor is we fully support. But maybe to start from a place of optimism, and that is just what I've seen happen, because we're not a standard setter, but what I now see happening in the space of nature and biodiversity, the willingness to collaborate is so much greater than it has ever been in the space of carbon and how we measure that. If I look at the science-based targets for nature network, if I look at your own organization, the Capitals Coalition, if I look at how GRI is now working with the European Commission, if I look at how SASB and Integrated Reporting Council are merging and are feeding, this is unprecedented. And so I think in terms of accelerate, of course we're not there. I'll be the first to point that out. But I think we can drive some optimism from the fact how organizations are finally coming together at quite an early stage to get these things right. But I think, to me, of course, ultimately the proof of the pudding is, like, are we seeing that companies are moving to what we call in carbon, we talk about net zero, and in nature we may end up talking about nature positive. Is this actually going to happen? Because that is ultimately the only measure of success that we have. And one critical bit which I will add to the conversation that we've had so far about accounting is accountability, because this is massively lacking. There are two companies in this call that both from their own perspective sort of explained how they have a massive global reach. They operate across many different jurisdictions. They employ thousands and thousands of people, and they have probably thousands of suppliers. Now, our world currently doesn't have a mechanism to hold these same companies to account. And this is not only about nature. We can talk about this in social, in climate, in many other areas. This is currently what is missing. So part of what we try to bring with the World Benchmark Alliance is to then take all of this data and through methodologies make sure that we can make comparisons between companies on how they are actually doing relative to each other and in absolute terms. And this is not to pick on BMW, but just because they're in this call, there are then two stories to tell. And one is that if you look at the largest 30 automotive companies in the world, then BMW is clearly in the top. It's a top 5 performer in terms of how it's driving its decarbonization strategy. So this is a very narrow view just on decarbonization. I'm not talking about social or anything else. The reality is also that there isn't currently a single automotive company in the world that is aligned with the 1.5 degree scenario. And these are the sort of the two realities that we need to deal with. And this is the same problem that we're going to come up with in nature, is that how is all of this stuff going to end up to real impact in the world, and what mechanisms do we have to hold companies accountable? And this is not to discredit anything of the things that have been said, but to recognize that everything what we've heard so far, and including what I'm now saying about benchmarks, are partial solutions. And there's now a real need to bring these solutions together. So the taxonomy alone won't fix it. The CSRD alone won't fix it. A benchmark alone won't fix it. But that is not a reason not to do that. The reason, the work upon us now is how do we make sure that we connect all of this? Because only collectively, as we sit here in this group, and the group is of course much bigger than the few people that can join a panel like this, how do we bring that together, that we ultimately create this mechanism of accountability so that all of this measurement, data collection, disclosure leads to companies that, given the topic of today, move to a situation where they are nature positive. And this is, and I think, and then I'll stop, Martin. This is partly a technical discussion, but it's becoming more and more a discussion of how do we organize ourselves. And you've started to allude to this. You started to, ask about what can the accountancy firms bring to the table, what can the European Commission bring to the table, but the more important question is becoming how do we find each other at that table?
Thanks, Gerbrand, for all your reflections on this. And what I want to do now is open up the discussion and the panel immediately following this, because I'm puzzled by one thing, to be honest. And what has been presented by the panelists, by all of you, is yes, there's a business urgency, there's a need that business starts to take nature into account and embed its value in its decision making. We all agree about it. We also all agree about the need to have standards, and we all agree about the need for collaboration. At the same time, we are struggling with it, and yes, there's some progress, but we are not already tackling the problems that are there. So why is that if the urgency is so clear to all of us? So what is keeping us from creating the standardized KPIs that we need? Am I missing something here? Are there actors outside this bubble we are in within the EBNS that are kind of keeping us from moving forward? Are we ourselves keeping ourselves from moving forward? That's kind of the question which is into my mind, and maybe we should go first to the businesses around the table and ask them, why aren't you just taking it on? Because it's your business, it's your problem in a certain way. So Andresa or Florian, do you want to comment on this?
I'm happy to start here, and probably also reflecting or commenting on what Gerbrand has just mentioned. We now talking for BMW, we have by the way, as the first car manufacturer, targets CO2 targets over the entire life cycle. So for the supply chain, for our own production, and for the downstream, so for the use phase until 2030, that are aligned with the 1.5 degree target and verified and validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So I think this is a first step and one very crucial step for us for taking accountability, for making it transparent and enhancing credibility here. Now, I think coming, Martin, to your question, I think for the real economy or companies in general, it is, or the transformation itself is very relevant, but also very challenging because, and that was also reflected and talked on before, we are talking about globally operating companies, and we are talking about very complex value chains, and enhancing transparency in the value chain is a challenge. And I think the question here is not only how or what are the right KPIs, but how can we make it measurable? How can we make it tangible? And ultimately, how can we make it comparable? Because I think that is what we need, not only for the financial market participants, but basically for every customer of company information. We need transparency and we need comparability. And how can that be achieved? It can be achieved by, for example, what the Value Balancing Alliance is doing, by standardizing and by monetizing company or corporate value contribution along its entire value chain, so upstream, downstream, direct operation, and by monetizing the corporate value creation, we enhance transparency, we enhance comparability, and I think that is a very, very essential and a very first step to enhancing the transformation and driving the transformation not only of companies, but ultimately of the entire economy.
So, Andresa, could you please build on this and also share your ideas about using monetization and standardization to come with comparable KPIs across sectors?
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind here is that there is a need of changing mindset. When business recognize and have at the heart of the strategy the sense that we rely on people, that we rely on nature, that we don't have the abundance that we had in the past, this will help definitely for the first question that you made. I think this is very central. And I agree that we do need to develop standards, and using monetization or impact evaluation is really helpful for us to deal with trade-offs, how we look at the different capitals and how we make better decisions if one affects another stakeholder or in another area of impact. So for us, it is definitely a way to support decision making and better choice.
Okay, Tom, can you please come in on this question and also on the role of transparent and its twin project Align? There's one question from the floor on what is the difference between those two projects. Maybe you can answer that question also, but please dive into the question whether or not transparent is the answer to the taxonomy and the need for more guidance there that we discussed before.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And first of all, I want to be very grateful to the panelists, because I find it, I found all the inputs of extreme high value. I'm not saying that very often in panels. The way Andresa was pitching the EPNL, couldn't do it better. So already explaining to people why it is we need the type of natural capital accounting that you apply, or what that VBA is working on. That's already the first step. Everybody said actually things that I noted down. So if I don't have time, I'll definitely come back to you. But about the urgency, what can we do? Well, first of all, and also, Florian, I want to come back to the point that the taxonomy was the flagship initiative. It is, but that doesn't mean that it is the holy grail, in my view, because again, taxonomy, and I think you explained it very carefully or well, at the end of the day, remains a classification tool. And I take the point that there might be more clarification needed. I'll pass on that message. And that it can help identifying green solutions. So for that reason, there's many reasons why it is good to have it. Can I just... Many reasons to have it. But it's actually answering the question, are you green or not green? And if not, to what extent are you green and not green? It does not answer the question, what is your footprint? To what extent is that a problem, and what is your plan to work, to solve it going forward? I think Gerband was also making allusion to the need for forward-oriented policies. So again, many things. Also, Jan Menko, I think it's important that people understand it is a complex issue, and there's sometimes this urge to make it simple, and we end up with simplistic solutions. And we need to rebalance so that we have simple in the sense that they're usable and that we can build it up as we go. I do believe, and again, I want to, that what we try to do in transparent, basically in transparent, we made a direct response to the call that was in the Green Deal, which was support business and stakeholders in their efforts to standardize natural capital accounting methods. And some call it impact weighted. There's a common denominator. So it's a business-driven process accompanied with civil society, academics, what Jan Merkel was saying. We need that setting. And we need that setting in Europe, and we need that setting going from Europe to the rest of the world, because the value chains are global by nature. If you're going to go for systems that are carved up in the world, it will not work. That said, when it comes to disclosure regulations, I think the respective constituencies can have views, but the underlying accounting system, in my view, should, as a minimum, be harmonized across the world. Now, going forward, where I think the solution is that, again, the taxonomy is a reality and it will serve a purpose, but it is not sufficient to promote the transition, because green is 5% of the world or the financial markets. We need a story and a tool to mobilize the 95% of the economy that is gray, that doesn't realize how gray it is, and that we need to help with measure and value and then move forward. That's going to help. So in my view, transparent already brings together corporate, which is underrepresented in the debate, where mostly are financial institutions, so that's good. Financial service institutions such as Ernst & Young, but many others, as was said, they need to, in my view, help bridging the solutions provided by the academic community, which is very good, but often too sophisticated to be implemented practically, at least in a one go. Academics and political institute or policy institutions, I'm sorry, not politics. So we build on it. Transparent is a temporary venture. So we never wanted to start competing as an event with others. We need to consolidate. It's what we see happening internationally. And I would make a plea to consolidate around the VBA/capital/World Business Council setup. I'm not going to make strong opinions on how it should ultimately look at, but we need to keep building that momentum and then basically tackle, again, there's no time to repeat it, but many right issues that have been said around the table, suggestions for going forward. I want to pick one more from Gerband, who was saying that he's very positive because he sees so much willingness to cooperate on the nature side compared to decarbonization, because decarbonization is a geopolitical issue. So there's also some reason for it. But I do think that if we take a holistic approach and we go for solutions that help us understand our relation with nature in general, air, water, land, biodiversity, we will be ending up with way more solid solutions going forward. Is monetization key? In my view, yes. It's the only way to start blending it with traditional business processes. Is it the only solution? No. Monetization is not an alternative for also keeping track of physical impacts. It complements and helps bringing complex issues into the business stream. So we should more and more consolidate our efforts, use transparent as a vehicle, but look way beyond that and be more ambitious, even also looking at the international side. So that would be my take for now. I'm sorry if I took a bit time for that, but quite excited, and many thanks to the panelists. Very inspired.
Thanks, Tom. You didn't mention the difference between align and transparent. And for the time's sake, I just very briefly share with the audience that transparent is looking at all four capitals and the impacts and dependencies, and align is deep diving a little bit more into biodiversity with all the specifics there, but they are really a twin projects, and we bring the two together. To be honest,
if I may just, Martin, one last thing. I focus on environment, which is very complex, but that's without prejudice to the importance of the social in the triple bottom line approach. So I just make that clear. VBA, and I understand also Andresa, they're focused on it's the right thing to do, but I was focusing on environment for the time being.
Yeah. So, but it's also always good to be aware that we are not just looking to nature, but also to people, society, and of course to the economy itself. And I'm sensing a little bit of uneasiness with the audience because they are looking for solutions on the short term. So one of the questions is, and it's almost with a sigh, I think, when I read this, when do you all think this standardization of KPI monetization methods could realistically happen? When will it be there? And so Jan Menko having EY and here around the table, when do you think this could happen?
I believe we just started a journey, and if you remember, as IFRS, as International Financial Reporting Standard started, there was one standard available 25 years ago. And what happened is from year to year, this framework is getting more and more complete. And this could be a similar approach we will have for ESG reporting or sustainability disclosures in total. And I think Gabran said that reporting is only the first step, but I think in our market economy, this is a very important step because disclosure and standardized disclosure decide about resource allocation. And if companies are requested to drive a sustainable business, then they will do, because companies do what the stakeholders want that they do. Not only the investors, the customer as well, and the employees as well. If you have companies with a bad environmental footprint today, they have really difficulties to recruit the right people. And these are developments which are based on transparency in terms of performance in other areas of fields as financials. And for me, in our global system for market economy, this will drive the change. But the regulators have to set the standards a little bit, that this is possible to drive this change.
Yes, thanks for bringing IFRS to the table, Jan Menko, and the kind of the awareness that IFRS started with the first version. And I'm not an accountant, so I don't know exactly whether we are in 44, 49, are we already in IFRS 50, but we are far away from number one. And so when we would now qualify version 1, probably we would think with the knowledge now that it was just a crappy thing to start with. But still, it was good to start. So I think this is an important lesson for natural capital and biodiversity also. What we already have is good enough to start with, as the examples of Andresa, Natura, and Co. and BMW also already have pointed out. So I think this is a good kind of lesson we should be aware of. I want to bring in you, Gerbrand, again, and because one of the questions, one of the issues you raised, there's no mechanism in the world to hold companies accountable. And what we've heard in the discussion so far is, yes, there really is a need for more standardization. Monetization could do part of the job, but still it's a struggle. Are you expecting mechanisms to be available that can help holding companies accountable soon? Or based on the discussion so far, are you thinking, oh my God, it will take ages? The pessimist in you or the negative thinker?
Professor Bob Eccles once told me that it took 70 years to develop a global financial accountability accounting standard, and then we still had two, one for the US and one for the rest of the world. So that should just be serve as a note of caution for everyone to manage their own expectations. Then the other thing is that what we're trying to measure here is much more complicated, because it involves a much larger number of stakeholders. This is not an interaction between investors and the companies. This is about what we as scientists and society expect from companies. And therefore it is going to take many different versions before and they will continue to evolve, because scientific understanding evolves and societal expectations evolve. Right as we sit here, we would have had a different conversation before COVID. We would have had a different conversation before Black Lives Matter. These societal expectations and scientific understanding evolves, and therefore standards will evolve. And we just have to accept that. And I think taking that and then taking a step back, I think what we will see coming out of the EU within the next sort of 2 years will be a massive step. IFRS will very likely move into nature once they've done climate. That doesn't have to take 70 years. I think that will go quite quickly. What we will do as the World Benchmark Alliance, which is on our part, is we will launch a methodology that builds on a lot of this stuff in January. So it builds on mostly existing indicators, trying to see what comes out of emerging from the Science-Based Target Network, what comes out of TNFD. And that provides us with a first methodology that we can assess. And hopefully by the end of, when we speak again this time next year, we will have assessed about 500 companies on nature. Now, again, we don't need to wait for the perfect methodology, because then there wouldn't be a benchmark next year. But we take what is currently there and we provide a first view of how companies in the mining industry and agriculture are aligning and are bringing their business models to a nature positive frame. But these things will evolve. I think why I'm telling the story is that no one needs to wait for alignment. No one needs to wait for standardization. There are two companies in this call that are not waiting for standardization. They've called for it, but they didn't wait for it. And I think this is the important thing, that whenever we hear people saying, well, we can't move because there isn't a standard yet, or we can't move because there isn't clarity yet, that's nonsense. We know the direction of travel. Everyone can accelerate. And then it's for us as a community of accountants, standard setters, people inputting in these processes to move along as quickly as possible. But whenever someone says that they can't move because of this lack of clarity, we need to call it out, because it's nonsense.
Okay, so that is a clear message. No need to wait for standardization. We know the direction of travel. One question on the nature benchmark that you're developing now, because several of us also said we should approach nature in the bigger context. It is linked to social and human capital. It's linked to a specific geography, to the supply chains, etc. The World Benchmarking Alliance has already many other benchmarks. So can you say something about how you want to link the natural capital benchmark with these other benchmarks? Yeah,
so what we do, because the World Benchmark Alliance is tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that means that with every benchmark, we put people at the heart. So what we have developed are core social indicators. These revolve around human rights, working conditions, business ethics, and they are applied to every benchmark. So whenever we assess a company on climate or on nature, we also make these assessments about how they're doing in human rights. For climate, that means that we can then say something about just transition, right? So not only is the company from a sort of counting emissions point of view on track to decarbonize, but it is also bringing along workers, communities, etc., to facilitate this transformation. So you can't separate the two. So what you will see more and more coming out of the World Benchmark Alliance is that these benchmarks operate as modules. So when you look at the oil and gas company, let's say Total, then we would assess that company on its decarbonization pathway, which is one module. We will assess it on its nature impact, which is one module, and we will assess it on its social impact and social inclusion. Now, so we will put our own weighting to that, but I accept that that's slightly arbitrary. So different stakeholders, depending on their needs, can put different weightings to these issues, right? So you may have, as an investor, a singular conversation with Total about its decarbonization strategy. That's a very different conversation that the government of Malawi will have about its extractives. And about how that is being managed. And they need different sets of data and they need different comparability. So more and more of this will be modular, and we will make sure that more and more of this is that you can separate out the methodology, the data, and ultimately the benchmarking, because they serve different purposes for different groups of people. But you're very right. There is you need to have a dedicated benchmark for nature or for climate or for digital inclusion or for the financial institutions. But it's our role to make sure to show how they are interoperable to different stakeholders.
Yes, that is a clear message that, of course, there can be specific benchmarks, but you need to put them into context and into connection too. I want to raise a totally different point for developing future KPIs. And I very much agree with what you've now said, Gerbrand, but also others already touched upon the need to have an inclusive process where all stakeholders, not only business accountancy organizations, but also policy, academics, civil society organizations can play their role. One of the questions in the audience is whether there's a danger if the big companies and consultancies are leading on the standard setting. And so the need to be inclusive already is kind of linked to that question, but still the question remains, what is needed to ensure that a collaboration of big corporates and consultancies is for the good of society and well-being, and not only for themselves, if I might rephrase the question. And so maybe starting with Andresa, from a company perspective, a reflection on your side. Do you see a danger in companies developing their own KPIs?
Yeah, maybe Thomas would like to start, not just because he heard. Okay. Yeah, I think I understand the question, but I don't think it is true, because those movements we are mentioning here, they are not just evolving companies and consultancies. For sure, the consultancies, they are supporting companies on this movement because they are bringing methodologies, and we have issues on data collection. It is challenging, and applying the methods that are still emerging, so it is important to have their help. But we have the protocols, the principles of transparency, consistency, comparability, trust. So I think it is not like this, just companies and working with consultancies that creates this environment of danger. I think the movement is larger, and we have academics, we have important movements in Oxford, Harvard, we have academics as well supporting this movement, and for sure those movements are not that close. And we need civil society professors definitely involved on those evolutions. And I hope the ISSB and IFRS relook at Natura case and be able to create those new standards faster than we have created with the financial ones. Look at those recent evolutions from companies.
Okay, thanks for that, Andresa. And the 70 years that Gerbrand talked about before really needs to be shorter here. Your message is, yes, front-running companies work on it together with big consultancies, but not in isolation. They are connected to academia, civil society organizations, and all of the others, and it is a collective effort. So I hope that's already a little bit assuring, but maybe Thomas, I saw your hand up just before. You want to add to this question too?
Yeah, because it's an obvious correct question on people's mind. And in fairness, if you would let big corp go on their own, it will not be as transparent as it should be or as useful as it should be. But as Andresa was saying, what I observe is already combinations of companies. I should argue that we should not only look at the big companies, but they're usually better equipped to advance innovative solutions than SMEs, for example. We should make sure that we look for solutions that work for big and for medium and for small eventually. We should combine them with, as I said before, financial service companies. And then we talk about academics, yes, but in this case, I think the academic input might be a second layer input, because at some point we need to translate something into something that is operational and usable and can be blended sooner rather than later with traditional decision making, which is mostly financial and economic and monetized. Yeah, and then civil society, and again also here government can represent civil society, and we have other NGOs. But again, we have already, I believe, in the VBA already a structure that goes in that direction. Can it be improved? Probably yes. I have to say that I'm usually quite positively impressed by the willingness of companies to share publicly quite new approaches that show footprint. Yeah, because that's not so easy to admit. So the Carings and the others, they're admitting they have a footprint, and that's a reality that we all need to live with. We have a footprint. Everything else is just fooling ourselves. And the footprint calculation, if I may call it like that, will improve over time. What is important for now is that we bring various aspects together from the various capitals and start seeing things in perspective and come up with robust strategies, like Andresa and others were saying. So, yeah, and that, in my view, is an area where governments, possibly also the Commission, can step up its role. And I was very happy to see that in the 21 Sustainable Finance Strategy, further work on natural capital accounting, like was put in the Green Deal, has now become an explicit item. So I'm hopeful on that. And yes, of course, we need to combine it with the work streams on taxonomy, etc. That will be the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. Time is pressing us forward. We started a little bit later due to technical problems, but my ambition is to end in time. So I want to go through all of the panelists with a final question, and you only need to give an answer of one word. So that's the easy part. You don't need sentences, one word is enough. My question to all of you is, how can we push for a higher bar on using KPIs to report on impacts and dependencies in the business community? A higher bar because it's not only used by frontrunners like Natura and BMW here in the call, but by a much larger group of companies across the world. What is the key thing you think we need or should do? And I just go the other way around. So I start with Gerbrand. What word do you think we really need to have in our mind?
Mandatory.
Mandatory. That's the first one. Thank you very much. We move to Jan Menko.
Same here, regulation.
Regulation. So Thomas, I see a nice word for you coming at the end, but we first go to Florian.
And then I say credibility, and
Credibility.
I would also like to add a second one, which is holistic, because I believe the holistic picture that underlines the entire company transformation is essential. Sorry, that was more than one word, but I thought it's important.
So we will forget holistic for a moment, but you've said it. Well, okay, that's all right. Andresa.
Policy.
Sorry?
Policy.
Policy. And Thomas, what would be your word?
I'll dig up an old word, a word I used in the past, EGAP. Generally accepted environmental accounting principles that supports regulation. You cannot regulate every single detail, in my humble view.
Yeah, so this is an interesting set of words. Mandatory regulation, so that's on the side of what policymakers, what the EU could do. Credibility, that's what we all can work on, of course. Policy, again, that's another word for regulation and mandatory in this context. And EGAP, which are the generally accepted accounting principles. It is clear for all of us, I think, that if we want to step up the use of KPIs in a standardized way, if we want to make companies more accountable, we need something that we all can work with, that is credible, but there's also a kind of a push from the government side to implement this. At the same time, and I want to recall what Gerbrand said at a certain moment, there's no need to wait for standardization. I would add to that, there's also no need to wait for regulation. At the same time, I know, and I just bring to your attention a report the Dutch PBL, the Environmental Planning Agency, did last year on the implementation of disclosure in the Netherlands across 35 big companies in the Netherlands. And one of the outcomes there was also that without regulation, companies are not moving forward. So maybe we need regulation. The optimist in me, maybe the naive guy in me, still believes that there's no need to wait for standardization. So I think we've heard from Andresa on Natura, from Florian, from his position in BMW, also from Jan Menko, what is already happening in the accounting world. Yes, there is a need for standardization, but there's already a lot possible and implemented right now. So we can move forward. The EU will further develop its regulation, its guidance, transparent, the taxonomy. That is all good as a push, but please let not forget there's no need to wait for standardization. I thank you all for this panel, for all of your contributions, and thank the audience for listening to us. We are closing this session. Thank you all.